You walk into sprint planning with a coffee. You walk out 2 hours later with a commitment you do not believe in, story points nobody agreed on, and the same vague tickets from 3 sprints ago. I have been building software for over a decade. I have worked on teams that did agile properly, teams that thought they did agile properly, and teams that were running waterfall in a Jira costume. And in all that time, the one ceremony that consistently disappoints is sprint planning. Not because the idea is bad, the idea is fine. You look ahead, you slice the work, you agree on what is going in. Solid in theory. But in practice, most sprint planning sessions are theater. Everyone plays their role. Nobody says the quiet parts out loud. And then you spend the next 2 weeks wondering why the sprint is already off the rails by Wednesday. So here are 7 reasons your sprint planning is a waste of time. Not the reasons your Scrum Master will tell you, the real ones. Let's start with the most obvious one, because the whole ceremony falls apart before it even begins. The backlog is a graveyard. Nobody tends. Your backlog has tickets in it from 14 months ago. Some of them reference a feature that was discovered. Some of them were written by a product manager who left the company. One of them just says, "Look into this," with no description, no acceptance criteria, and a priority label of high that was set in 2022. In every sprint, you open that backlog, and everyone quietly scrolls past the ancient ones like they are not there. You do a bit of grooming, you pick the freshest tickets off the top, and you call it a plan. The problem is that a backlog without active maintenance is not a planning tool. It is a to-do list from a different company. When your planning session starts with, "Okay, so what are we doing this sprint?" and the answer involves digging through 300 tickets in Jira with no clear ordering, you are not planning. You are rummaging. Here is something that happens on almost every team I have ever seen, and almost nobody names it directly. Nobody actually understands the requirements. The ticket comes into planning. The PM walks through it. It sounds reasonable. Everyone nods. Someone asks a clarifying question. The PM answers it with confidence. The answer does not quite address the question, but it sounds like it does, so the team moves on. Then the sprint starts. A developer picks up the ticket on day 2, reads it properly for the first time, and discovers there are 4 edge cases nobody discussed. The design does not match the described behavior, and there is a dependency on an API endpoint that does not exist yet. Sprint planning is supposed to surface this. It almost never does, because the incentive in the room is to get through the tickets, not to genuinely interrogate them. Slowing down feels like friction, so everyone approves work they do not fully understand, and the confusion just gets deferred into the sprint, where it costs 10 times more to resolve. Number 3, and this one drives me genuinely mad. Story point estimation is performance art, planning poker. Everyone holds up their card. You reveal them. There is always someone who says 3. There is always someone who says 13. And then instead of having a real conversation about why those 2 numbers are so far apart, the team gravitates toward whatever the tech lead said and calls it consensus. I have watched teams spend 25 minutes estimating a ticket as a 5 when they could have just assigned someone to it and had it done in that same 25 minutes. The velocity charts look great. The actual delivery does not match them. Here is the dirty truth about story points. On most teams, they are not measuring complexity. They are a social contract that lets the team feel like they have planned rigorously without actually committing to anything specific. And when the sprint ends and 30% of the points are incomplete, nobody recalibrates. They just carry the tickets over and do it again next sprint. Moving on. And this one is about the guest list. The wrong people are in the room. Sprint planning meetings often have everyone in them. Front end, back end, QA, DevOps, the PM. Sometimes a stakeholder who was just curious. And because everyone is there, the meeting becomes a briefing. Context gets repeated for the benefit of people who do not need it. Conversations that should happen between a back-end engineer and the PM eat up time for the whole group. Meanwhile, the one person who knows how the payment service actually works is not there because they are a contractor and were not invited. The designer who made those Figma specs finished them last night and is asleep in a different time zone. Effective sprint planning is a small room. It is the people who are going to build the thing, the person who owns the product vision, and nobody else. When the room is too big, the meeting optimizes for the least informed person in it. Everything slows down to that pace, and the engineers who actually need to think through the technical approach spend the whole session half listening. This next one is the one that really reveals the whole thing as fiction. The sprint starts with unplanned work already queued. You finish planning on Friday afternoon. You have committed to 12 tickets. Everyone feels okay about it. The sprint officially starts Monday. By Monday at 11 a.m., there is already a Slack message, a bug from last release, a client escalation, a quick thing the CEO mentioned over the weekend that is now apparently urgent. None of it is in the sprint. All of it is going to get done anyway, because that is just the reality of how the business operates. So you had a 2-hour planning meeting to arrive at a plan that is already out of date before the first stand-up. This is not a planning problem. It is a culture problem. Sprint planning cannot work if the team does not have the authority to say no to unplanned work mid-sprint. And most teams do not have that authority. So the ceremony produces a plan, and the business ignores it, and everyone just silently agrees to pretend otherwise. Here is another one that takes a while to see for what it is. Velocity is used to set expectations, not improve the process. Velocity exists to help a team understand its own capacity over time. It is a tool for the team. That is the theory. In practice, it becomes a KPI. Management asks why velocity dropped this sprint. PMs use last sprint's velocity to promise delivery dates to stakeholders. The number starts to matter more than what it represents. And when velocity becomes a target rather than a signal, engineers respond rationally. Estimates go up. Tickets get split in ways that inflate points without adding value. The team learns to game the metric without anyone explicitly deciding to. It just happens, because that is what humans do when they are measured. So sprint planning sessions start to subtly optimize for a number on a chart instead of for actually shipping good software. And the Scrum Master runs the burn-down chart in the retrospective, and everyone looks at it and nods, and nothing fundamentally changes. And finally, the last one, and honestly, the one that explains all the others. Sprint planning substitutes for continuous alignment. The deeper problem with how most teams run sprint planning is that they treat it as the alignment moment. The one time in the fortnight where the team, the product, and the business get on the same page. So it carries an enormous amount of weight for a 2-hour meeting. But alignment does not happen in a scheduled ceremony. It happens in the conversations between engineers and PMs when a requirement is ambiguous. It happens when a designer shares work in progress instead of waiting for a handover. It happens when an engineering lead flags a technical risk before it becomes a blocker, not after. When those conversations are not happening continuously, sprint planning has to compensate. It becomes overloaded. It runs long. People use it to surface problems that should have been surfaced a week ago. And then you wonder why it always feels chaotic and unresolved. The teams I have seen run sprint planning well are the ones where sprint planning is almost boring, because the real work of alignment happened before anyone sat down in that room. So look, none of this means sprint planning is unfixable. It is not. But fixing it requires honesty about what is actually broken. And most teams are not having that conversation. Tend the backlog. Make the tickets readable before planning day. Keep the room small. Protect the sprint from unplanned work, or at least be honest when you cannot. And stop treating the ceremony as a substitute for the communication that should be happening all the time. Agile works when the principles are lived, not just scheduled. 2 hours every fortnight is not a planning culture. It is a planning habit. Those are very different things. The teams that ship consistently are the ones who figured that out. If this one rang a few too many bells, subscribe. New video every week. And drop in the comments the one sprint planning crime your team commits most consistently. I read all of them.